This is Justice for All. In our next hour, we're going to be talking with Marcie Wheeler. She's with a blog that she's a really highly intelligent lady that it's called Empty Wheel, and she writes for various online magazines and is a real. We've had her on the show before when we talked about General Petraeus. Remember that, Marcy?
It was a fun conversation.
Yeah. So anyway, and I think Petraeus even comes up in some of your most recent. But we're talking about the Patriot Act today. What do you know about the Patriot Act? That's kind of, I know a lot of our listeners just kind of assume, well, let's see, the Patriot Act that was passed a long time ago, and this is all about, we've got so much to talk about with this new Patriot Act, what they're trying to get through. What's going on?
Well, so three provisions, actually two of the Patriot Act and one from an entirely different law, but three provisions will expire midnight Sunday to Monday night. And the best known of those is Section 215, which is what the government has been using since 2006 to collect all of our phone records on a daily basis, plus a bunch of other stuff, which is probably more useful to the government.
Is that what you call the dragnet?
That the phone records I call the dragnet. The other stuff is probably mixed dragnet. It's bulky, but it's not all the phone records or all the internet records in the country. And
this is all the stuff that Edward Snowden first told us about, right? I mean, all this was going on for a long time under Section 215, and we didn't know about it until Snowden blew the whistle.
Yeah, I remember the first thing that The Guardian published was an order to Verizon to turn over all their phone records on a daily basis. And we're finally, 2 years later, almost to the day, trying to do something about Verizon having to turn over all our phone records every day.
Well, is this important to combat terrorism? Is this something that we should be concerned about? I mean, isn't there the big issue is we've got privacy issues, but yet we've got terrorist issues. So where do you come down on all this?
Well, not where I come down. Where the administration comes down is that they have never once stopped a terrorist plot using this phone dragnet. The only thing they have to show for it in terms of concrete stopping a plot was they found a guy who in 2008 was sent $8,500 to al-Shabaab in Somalia, and not even because he wanted to support al-Shabaab as a terrorist organization, but because he wanted to, fight back Kenyan intruders to Somalia. And that's all they have. That's all the concrete stuff they have to show for this phone dragnet. And one of the reasons why is because they have a lot of redundant authorities, and the FBI, which has the lead on investigating terrorism in this country, for the most part, where they were finding interesting contacts, the FBI already had, and they had gotten via direct orders to the phone companies. So, that's one reason to think that losing the phone dragnet is not going to be that big of a deal. Well,
why in the world does the government do this if they don't need it? I mean, isn't that the question? Why in the world do we need this authority to just snoop on every single thing that, I mean, basically, I think what Snowden says is every single thing that we say or do over the internet or on the phone is being somehow collected by the NSA. And what's the purpose of it if it's not doing any good to stop terrorism?
Well, because they can. No, honestly, the domestically collected phone records, and they used to domestically collect internet records under a parallel authority, and no longer do. Haven't since 2011, at least according to what they tell us. They are just the small fraction domestic part of a massive global dragnet, and they continue to collect everything they can overseas, including the calls. My mother-in-law is Irish, so the calls between her and I, she and I, would be collected overseas and from Verizon on a daily basis. And they will continue to get the calls between us as they transit between Ireland and the United States. And on the stuff they collect overseas, they do a lot more exotic things. And that's one of the underlying issues with this reauthorization debate is they would love to do all the funky things that they're allowed to do overseas with records from Americans. And the phone dragnet, as it currently exists, doesn't allow them to do that, and that's one of the reasons they're okay going to the providers to get this information rather than collecting it all themselves, because there are more rules imposed on this collection now and they really want to abide by.
Well, now, right now, who is Senator Burr? What is and Mitch McConnell? They're heavily involved in this move, right?
Sure. Mitch McConnell is majority leader in the Senate, and so when you wake up on Monday morning and they say, "Oh my gosh, the Patriot Act expired," he's actually the one who's responsible for that, because he should have started scheduling the debate for this about 2 weeks ago. And he didn't. He thought that he was going to be clever and wait until the last minute and fearmonger some changes, and it didn't work out. So he's the one who's been scheduling the debate on this. He's the one who's called everyone back to try again tomorrow night. And then Richard Burr is the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and he would actually like to expand the phone dragnet in the United States and make it a phone and internet dragnet, and, as I said, do all those funky things that they're allowed to do on data collected overseas, do it here. So basically he wants to treat Americans like they treat foreigners for the purposes of weeding through all of our internet and phone metadata.
So if it expires tomorrow night, what does that mean for the program? Does it just stop and that's it? There's no more ability to compile these phone records?
Right.
That's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm happy about that. I think it's a big waste of time and money and resources. What's probably going to happen is, I would say the most likely thing to happen is, a week ago they tried to pass the USA Freedom Act, which passed by huge numbers in the House, and they fell 3 votes short of cloture, 3 votes short of agreeing to debate it. I suspect that they're going to come up with those 3 votes tomorrow night. And then Mitch McConnell, majority leader, is going to say, okay, let's immediately vote on the bill. And Rand Paul is going to say, nope. And according to the archaic rules of the Senate, that means they have to wait 30 hours until they can actually vote on it. And then it'll lapse for 30 hours, and they may need to tweak the language, but they may be back in the business of collecting all these records for 6 months, for a 6-month transitional period that's part of the USA Freedom Act, as soon as, say, Tuesday. Or they may be discussing it for a little while longer. Who knows?
Well, tell us about give us a brief history of the Patriot reauthorization debate. When is the Patriot Act? When was it first passed? What was the purpose of it? And where do we stand? I mean, what's what's the calendar on it?
Well, so the Patriot Act was a huge set of changes that were pushed through in September, October 2001, right after the 9/11 attack. And I would bet there's maybe 30 people alive who can tell you everything that was included in it. But it did things like provide additional protections for first responders. It provided a lot of extra tools for tracking of financial records. One of the other things that Rand Paul doesn't like about it is it allows sneak peeks. It allows people to do searches without telling anybody about them. That is primarily used for drug searches now. So it really shouldn't have been part of a response to 9/11, but it was. So he'd like to get rid of that as well.
What the Patriot Act did really was allow government to just get around they didn't have to go get regular wiretaps. They could snoop and eavesdrop on people using Patriot Act authorization and not follow the law, right? I mean, isn't that what it ended up happening for a lot of law enforcement?
Well, I think that overstates it, but they did provide a lot more tools to get to the content that they wanted, and not all of those tools have been limited to terrorist suspects. So, yeah, I mean, and again, some of this is just for metadata and some of it is for the actual content, but it just gave law enforcement and other intelligence authorities a lot more power, and most of those we've forgotten about. Most of those are permanent. These 3 provisions, again, one of which technically isn't even part of the Patriot Act, those are the only ones that expire. The Congress thought that they were particularly sensitive, and so they put sunsets on, and we renewed them in 2006. Again, in 2006, there was actually a big debate that there was a kind of a lapse. There was a filibuster in 2005, right after the New York Times revealed some of the illegal dragnet that the Bush administration had been involved in, and so that delayed reauthorization of the Patriot Act 3 months then. And then we had debates in 2009 that kind of trickled through 2010 and 2011. So these authorities have been renewed a couple of times. Congress continues to renew them. Richard Burr, who I told you was the Intelligence Committee chair, he'd like to stop this renewal process. It allows people to scrutinize what the intelligence community is doing, and so he doesn't like that.
I mean, he just wants to pass a law that says it just stays the law and doesn't get reviewed. It just remains the law until somebody decides to repeal it.
He wants to give the intelligence community anything they ask for, and he's not much interested in our privacy.
Right. And now, what do you call USAF Redux? What is that? Is that the bill?
That's my name for USA Freedom Act. It's a joke that, we keep seeing the same bill come back. But that's the bill that was passed by 338 votes to 83, I think, a couple weeks ago in the House. So really overwhelming support. And that's really the most likely outcome to keep the dragnet alive for 6 months is that the Senate will then pass that bill tomorrow night. But there are still some problems with that, even as it is.
Now, if you're just joined us, we're with Marcie Wheeler. She has her website is Empty Wheel, and I'm reading some of what you've written. I believe it's on your blog and on your website, where you say that Richard Burr wants to give the intelligence community anything that they want, and I'm seeing a list of it here. They want full coverage on both telephone and IP-based calls and messaging and other kinds of internet communications. They want the ability to share this promiscuously. I love that word. Or promiscuously, I'm sorry. We think of promiscuous as some other sort of a thing, but when you say ability to share this information promiscuously, what do you mean by that?
Right now, when the NSA does a query, so they've got all of the phone records, and then they go in and do individualized queries and get the results. And it's a list of all the people 2 degrees away from the original suspect and some other details about the calls. And when they do those queries, they can only share those broadly with people who are already trained into the program within NSA. If they want to go beyond that, if they want to give it to the FBI, they have to go to a manager and say, can you sign off on the fact that this is a counterterrorism related piece of information? And it adds bureaucracy and it makes it hard to share with the FBI. Under USA Freedom Act, what's going to happen is the records will go immediately to both the FBI and the NSA. And because the FBI is a domestic law enforcement agency and not a foreign intelligence agency, their rules on whether or not they're allowed to share information about Americans are much weaker. They can take databases full of metadata and make complete copies and send them on to somebody else. So in other words, it will be a lot easier for the FBI to get to the results of these queries, and that has the benefit of making it immediately more accessible if it's really urgent and national security related. But it also means that these records of a lot of them, of the majority of them, will be innocent Americans, will be stuck in FBI's database for 30 years. And the FBI may regard that as some reason to be suspicious of a person if they find it in a future search, for whatever reason. They start investigating you for something entirely unrelated, and 5 years down the road they say, oh my gosh, Marcy had a call with somebody 2 degrees away from somebody we think is a terrorist back in 2015. And that's the kind of thing that could happen just because the FBI gets the record.
So is every single phone call that we make and every single internet communication, let's say if it's a voice over internet protocol type call or a Skype or is that all being collected? Every single thing we say, is that true that everything we say or every phone call we make, whether it's on a cell phone or a landline, it's being collected by NSA right now as we speak?
Not for us because we're Americans.
Right.
So they are getting our telephony phone calls. They're probably not getting all of our internet content. What they are getting, they're getting overseas. Because of the way the internet works, sometimes I email you and it'll go through France. And the NSA grabs everything they want in France and keeps a lot of the metadata. And so it may be that they have a record of our email, or even a VoIP call or some other things that they picked up in France, and they treat that data that they got in France differently than they wouldn't even get it here in the United States because they need, particularly for internet stuff, because of the technology, because internet stuff, it's harder to distinguish what's content from what is metadata. It's harder for them to get a ton of internet metadata in the United States, whereas they'll just go overseas and grab it in bulk, and they do, and that includes quite a lot of Americans' data.
So it has to be a foreign call. If I'm on the cell phone and calling a friend of mine in California, I'm not being monitored.
Unless it's a VoIP call that for some reason gets routed through another country, in which case it might be.
Oh, I see. So just because
that's the point, yeah.
It could just be a fluke that because of the way that the data is being transmitted, I'm actually being monitored without even knowing it.
Right, and it's much more likely with other kinds of internet content. But traditional, like if I called you on a landline, that call is going to go the closest distance between 2 points. But if I email you, partly because Google and Microsoft and Yahoo and everybody else, to make their services as functional as possible, they kind of mirror all their data around the world. In other words, there's never any latency. If part of the system goes down, they've got it in multiple places. And that means that data, if it's not encrypted in transit, that means that data is going to be available to the government, and they're going to suck it up, and it's going to be there for them to go call on. And so that's probably one of the reasons why the NSA was willing to give up its domestic internet metadata collection, because they can get so much of it overseas. They also get a lot of it from providers under the PRISM program, but they can only go one deep into the United States via that. So in other words, if for some reason the NSA is collecting on my mother-in-law in Ireland, and they've asked Google to pull all of my mother-in-law's emails, any email I have with my mother-in-law on Google then will be in their possession because they've picked up my mother-in-law's email. But just the emails that I have with my mother-in-law, it won't be the other Google emails that I have.
You made a statement earlier that in all of these years, this Patriot Act was passed not long after 9/11, which was in September of 2001. Here we are in 2015, 14 years or so, actually maybe 13 and a half or whenever. And you say that it's never really been documented to have stopped a terrorist attack. How do we know that? I mean, isn't it possible that they've actually thwarted terrorist attacks, but it's just not public knowledge? What's your information to back up that statement?
So remember that we're talking about the Patriot Act authorized collection, which for the Internet went from 2004 to 2009 and then from 2010 to 2011. And the phone stuff went from 2006 until maybe tomorrow night. So there was the Bush's illegal wiretap program that happened before that, very, very similar program. There was an ID report that the New York Times liberated in the last month or so, and that revealed that something like 1.7 of the tips that came from Bush's illegal program and went to the FBI did one of three things. It either found details on somebody that we deported. So in other words, here's a guy from Saudi Arabia that we don't like, and we're going to deport him just because we don't like him. Two, stopped a terrorist attack. Or three, and this is another use that they still use these programs for, three, found somebody who might make a good informant. And so only 1.7% of what were considered good tips given to the FBI did any of those things. And that's according to the FBI's own records through 2004. The other, they didn't stop a terrorist plot that I claimed earlier, which is based on the Patriot Act authorized programs. After Edward Snowden did his leaks, the government came up with this list of 54 things that they had stopped because of these programs, and only 13 of them even involved the phone dragnet. The bulk of them were Section 702, the content that they get from Google. So the content collection from Google is useful, and people like Ron Wyden and Mark Udall, when he was still in the Senate, they were very clear. They were like, this PRISM program, this 702 program is very useful. We should continue it. The phone dragnet program has been nowhere near as useful, and so they gave this list of 13 plots that were thwarted, and then some of them we knew the details on, and we looked at it and we're like, no, those facts are not right. And so Patrick Leahy in particular kept hammering the FBI on their details, and ultimately they said, well, maybe just one. And there's some question whether even that one came up with the same rules. And then the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, which is it's an executive branch civil liberties group, they had access to the classified data on all these claims, and they went through it. And again, they're the ones who said even that one case, that sending $8,500 to Somalia, may be overblown. So they basically said the FBI has been overselling how useful this is. And even, the 13 cases that they gave are not persuasive.
Well, so where is this program useful? Because you made a comment a few minutes ago that Ron Wyden and some, I guess they're civil libertarian type folks that probably don't like the broad brush, but they do believe that there's some parts of the program that are useful. What parts of the program, in your opinion, if any, are useful and can are necessary to combat terrorism going forward?
Okay, so Section 215, which is the phone dragnet, which is authorized by Section 215. I'm sure that the FBI has used it predominantly to find informants. And it would be very useful to find informants because once you get into when they say the metadata is very revealing, it might reveal if you're having an illicit affair. Well, illicit affairs are things that the FBI might use to coerce somebody into informing on people in their mosque. So I suspect that's how the FBI has used the program. I don't particularly think that's a good idea. I don't think having informants running through our society, and especially people who've been coerced based off this data, I don't think that's necessarily the best way to fight terrorism. The program that Ron Wyden says is useful, which is Section 702, which is when the NSA and FBI go to Google and say, here's a bad guy, or here's a particularly interesting French guy, or here's a guy that we think is working with Iran to sell nuclear weapons. Can you give us all of your content, all of the content that this person has at Google, including all of the different identities they have at Google, including what YouTube accounts they have? Give us all of that. And Google does. And they're required to by the law, and Google gives it to them. And as you can imagine, that stuff is really valuable because you figure out, imagine how much, I don't know whether you use Google, I do. And if somebody can figure out everything I've done in Google for my entire life, and you can actually see what Google has on you, and it's pretty scary. But it's tremendously informative, and that is useful, and that's what Ron Wyden says is useful. So it's basically the kind of content that tells you everything that somebody of interest, whether they're a terrorist suspect or not, is doing online.
And the government can just get that from anybody just by saying we want to know what's going on with Marcie Wheeler. We want to check out every single thing that she's ever Googled, and Google just has to give it to them. No,
they can't get it on me. They could get. If they thought I was a really bad guy,
right?
They could use a subpoena to get the call records. They could find out who I've emailed. They could find out all of the accounts I have at Google and how I pay for it, and what phone numbers I have attached to those accounts. But they can't get my actual content from Google unless they have more proof that I'm a bad guy. Whereas so this 702 program that I said Ron Wyden said was useful, right? They can say that French guy is interesting because he's in France and he's not an American. It can only be targeted at people who are overseas and who are not Americans or green card holders.
Oh.
But they can get the American side of anything. So again, if they decided to go after my Irish mother-in-law, who's in Ireland, I don't know why they would, but if for some reason they thought she was interesting, all of my Google-based communications with her would be sucked up as well, what they call incidentally. But they couldn't go after me until they had more evidence. It might be that they go after my mother-in-law, and I say something to my mother-in-law in an email, and they then use that to go to the FISA court and say she's a bad guy because she said something to her mother-in-law, and then they're able to wiretap me. They're able to get my content. But to get Americans' content, they have to jump through a lot more hoops. To get Americans' metadata, it's pretty easy, and frankly, as I said, they can do it with a subpoena. They can do it with a national security letter for phone records really easily. They don't need this phone dragnet. And that's one of the reasons why the phone dragnet isn't that valuable, because the FBI is going all the time to phone companies and saying, with just a national security letter, they don't need court review on that, saying, Marcy's a bad guy. Can we have all of her phone records? Can we know who she's called? And they can do that on an individualized basis pretty easily.
We're here with Marcie Wheeler, and we're going to go to a short break. Before we go to break, tell us, I know you've got a number of blogs. What are the? I see Empty Wheel. You've also got Exposed Facts. Or what are the blogs that you write for?
The main places to find me are emptywheel.net, which is my really weedy stuff. So it takes a little while of reading me to get used to that. Exposedfacts.org is a column I write about whistleblowing in journalism about once a week, maybe hopefully more. So that's exposedfacts.org. And then I have a weekly column at Salon, usually goes up Thursday morning, and that may be on these topics or other related topics.
Okay, great.
That's my regular stuff.
We're going to come back from a break, and I want to talk about, because this new law's got some whistleblower provisions in it, doesn't it, which are kind of scary. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, we'll be right back then with Marcie Wheeler. We'll talk about journalism and whistleblowers and this NSA program and the Patriot Act. We'll be right back.
Denby Baptist Christian School is now enrolling students for the upcoming 2015-2016 school year. Denby Baptist Christian School offers a quality Christian education for students in kindergarten through the 12th grade and an early learning center for preschool children ages 2.5 to 4. DBCS is a ministry of Denby Baptist Church located in the Oyster Point section of Newport News, offering education marked by a biblical worldview, academic excellence, extracurricular activities, and affordability. Denby Baptist Christian School offers daily Bible classes and a weekly chapel service. Call and schedule your tour at Denby Baptist Christian School, 13010 Mitchell Point Road, Newport News. Call 757-249-2654. The mission of Denby Baptist Christian School is to educate the mind, nurture the soul, and shape the character of each student in a Christ-centered environment based on the truth of God's Word. Online at dbcs.org and dbcs-kids.org.
Spring is back, and so are the Norfolk Tides. Catch the fun and excitement as your Norfolk Tides take the field at beautiful Harbor Park. Bring your friends and family to root on the Orioles of tomorrow today. Log on to norfolktides.com for information on season tickets, groups, ticket discounts, and Tides merchandise. Follow the Tides on Twitter and Facebook for updates on promotions and player moves. Tides Baseball, minor leagues, major fun. Real people like real good food, and real men cook with wood. It all comes together at Smokin' Q's Barbecue and Grill in Portsmouth. The very best ribs, barbecue, wings, crab cakes, and baked beans so good, they're a food group unto themselves. All fresh made, and that's just part of the mouth-watering menu. If you want real food, real good food, you want Smokin' Q's, 3218 Stamford Road in the Churchland Shopping Center, 757-484-7075. Smokin' Q's.
We talk about it all the time on the show. Are you safe and secure online? Are you private? Leo Laporte here, the tech guy. Well, I've always said if you're on the internet, you're in public, but there are things you can do to protect yourself a little bit. You certainly should know what the risks are. We talk about that each and every week, plus all the latest news, gossip, and tech support. It's coming up this weekend right here with me, Leo Laporte, the tech guy.
Saturdays 8 p.m., Sundays 6 p.m. on K-Talk 1650.
Okay, we're back. If you just joined us, I'm George Yates. This is Justice for All. We're with Marcie Wheeler. She's writes the Right to Know column for Expose the Facts, and also, and you wrote an interesting article here about this bill that would criminalize sources used for the same story. There's provisions in this new law, this new Patriot law, that start putting journalists in jail for revealing their sources or for not revealing their sources. What's going on with that?
It's actually not the USA Freedom Act. It's a bill that Richard Burr and he offered one, and then Dianne Feinstein. That was their alternative. They're trying to look serious as I mean, because frankly, these provisions of the Patriot Act are probably going to lapse on Sunday night, and everyone's going to turn around and blame Rand Paul, but it's actually not his fault. It's Mitch McConnell's fault and these conservatives in the Senate. And so in a bid to look serious, they all of a sudden at the last minute released their own bill, which is basically a wish list for the intelligence community to say, here's why we can't take the USA Freedom Act, which is really a pretty moderate compromise. And as part of both Burr and Feinstein's bills, they included a 10-year sentence, the 10-year max sentence for people who leak any details of Section 215, which is really interesting because it's like they're so worried about us learning exactly what they're doing with this program, which they claim to be putting on the straight and narrow. They're going to put anybody in jail. They're going to invent a special part of the law to put people in jail if they tell the American public what's happening. So the people who would go to jail are the actual sources, whistleblowers. But it's pretty remarkable that they're doing so.
Well, tell us about that, because it seems like the journalists have signed off on this as if it's okay.
What happened was Richard Burr is a very shrewd man, and he had a press conference Friday night in the heat of, what are we going to do last minute? Oh, my gosh, scary, sky is falling, and said, I've got to compromise. This USA Freedom Act bill stinks. I've got to compromise. And then he gave them 11 bullet points, and they wrote, everyone wrote their stories based on these 11 bullet points and Richard Burr's claims that the bill was a compromise. And then I looked at it at 8 o'clock, and I was like, whoa, this is not a compromise. This is like expand the current dragnet and give the intelligence community everything they want to know. By the way, criminalize the sources that you used for this story. It was actually, I picked on an AP reporter who is one of the first people who reported that the phone dragnet actually doesn't collect a lot of phone data. I think it's probably because as you move into 4G technology, that actually becomes internet data. And because of the way Verizon keeps their records, they don't keep it. AT&T probably still has it, the stuff that transit their backbone, but Verizon doesn't. And because of that, there are these gaps in the phone collection, and this AP reporter was one of the first people to report that, and he was going back to the earlier reporting he had done on it from sources who said this is classified, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And joking, I thought it was very ironic that those people, they're probably official sources, so they would never be prosecuted, right? There are people in ODNI or something like that, but at least on paper, those sources would go to prison for up to 10 years for telling us something which we really ought to know about the phone dragnet, which is that it's not collecting as many phone records as they actually claim to be collecting.
So it's criminalizing people that are, I guess, within the government that have information that give it to, let's say, you, a reporter, and then you print it. And if they find out who your source is, that person can go to jail for 10 years.
Yeah, and it's not just in the government, because remember, all of these phone and other kind of provider companies, they'll know a lot about what's going on, and they may not like it. They're being forced to provide these records, and Verizon, for one, people think I'm being nice to Verizon, but there's very, very good reason to believe that Verizon has been pushing back against this since 2009.
Yeah, they don't like it either.
They don't like asking to be, also their business model is better than AT&T. So AT&T is happy to get the government money to do the spying, but Verizon would like to just do their job, which is provide phone service for their customers. I sound like I'm advertising for Verizon, and I'm not. But anyway,
it's so okay,
they have pushed back, and they don't want to be doing this. And so the government would also criminalize anybody from Verizon going to the press and saying, oh, my gosh, we thought we were just going to turn over records, and here's the other things they've asked for us to provide. So that also would be criminalized up to 10 years.
So with what General Petraeus did, would that have put him in this 10-year?
Well, he's one of those official leakers, so, Yeah, what he leaked was crazy secret. And one of the interesting things about this anti-whistleblower provision is that it defines what classified information is pretty much anything having to do with this program, whether or not it's actually classified. So it brings the bar for what counts as criminalized information very low, far lower than the stuff that David Petraeus shared with his mistress. But that's a testament to how badly they want to keep secrets about this program.
Now, this bill hasn't passed yet, though, right?
No, and Burr's bill would not pass in that form. But when Mitch McConnell screwed up last week, again, people like Burr are trying to find some excuse for why they are going to be responsible tomorrow night for the dragnet that they claim is critical to the safety of the country, why they will ultimately be responsible for it lapsing. They want to point to something that they find to be important, and one of those things is data retention. So going back to Verizon only keeps a lot of these records for a year to 18 months, and the government wants to force them to keep them from 2 to 3 years, so they have more data to kind of do pattern analysis on. And Verizon doesn't want to do that either. And so one other thing that Burr wants to do is force them to do that.
Well, tell us about, you mentioned Rand Paul, and he's a presidential candidate right now, and he's opposed to this Section 215 authority. Where does he come down on all this? What's his position on the whole eavesdropping program?
He's been very good at opposing all of these big dragnet programs, not just this. He's actually also good on criminal justice reform, on sentencing reform and stuff like that. But on this issue, he likens the collection of all the phone records in the United States to a general warrant. And there's, that's a perfectly valid argument because, general warrants is what King George used that pissed off the colonists, and one of the reasons we went to war against King George. And what he did was basically say, I can search the house of anybody in Boston, and did so. And what the government is saying with these phone records is, I can search the phone records of anybody in the United States, and I will keep them. I will gather and keep them so I can search them anytime I want without any real big pushback. And so that's what Paul has been saying from the start. He's been saying from the start that these bills don't go far enough. And I'm frankly pretty sympathetic with those views because,
as are a lot of people. A lot of people agree with that.
Right, and a lot more people in the House. As I said, there were 60 people in the House who voted against USA Freedom Act and said the reason we did is because it doesn't go far enough. And people in the House from both parties, it was pretty solidly transpartisan. Lots of Democrats, lots of Libertarian Republicans. The other people who are really skeptical of USA Freedom Act, people like Ron Wyden and Martin Heinrich, nevertheless are voted for cloture, at least on USA Freedom Act, even though they'd like to make it better.
Well, I saw the paper this morning. It was a headline. I don't know if I read the whole article, but it was Obama saying that if this is allowed to lapse and there's not a new bill, that we're going to be victims of a terrorist attack. Obama's coming out officially as saying that this is absolutely necessary for national security. Where does he get his data for saying that?
Well, so remember, 3 provisions are expiring. 215, which authorizes both the phone dragnet and other things, lone wolf provision, and roving wiretap. And what he's probably actually worried about is the roving wiretap and the other things they use Section 215 for. So they also use Section 215 to get bulky data from Internet companies. Like they'll go to an ISP and say, give me all your logs. Let me know everyone who's come across your ISP, or let me know everyone who's visited this website, or let me know everyone who has passed this little node in the Internet. That's the kind of stuff that they're also using this bill for, this law for. And there aren't other ways to do that. It's like, unlike the phone records, the FBI can't just use it. They used to do it. They're not supposed to anymore. So so there's no other way for the FBI to do it. And these are probably both one way I can imagine them using it is if there's a jihadist forum, right? So a bunch of Al-Qaeda sympathizers or ISIS sympathizers, and if that's located in the United States, hosted in the United States, I could see the FBI using these 215 orders to get records of everyone who's visiting that jihadist forum, and I can see why Obama would find that to be an important application. But what's probably the case about those orders is they don't expire Sunday night. They'll have the same 90-day expiration dates on them. And so some of them might start expiring Wednesday, but some of them aren't going to expire until August. And, it's not going to happen. The sky is not going to fall on that use of Section 215 on Monday morning. The phone dragnet program really isn't all that useful, so the sky is not going to fall when they lose that. And then the roving wiretap allows them to get, Al-Qaeda guy who keeps getting new phones, Al-Qaeda guy in the United States, because these are orders that are U.S.-based. They can go to the FISA court and say, this guy keeps getting new phones. Can we just move on to his new phone every time that he gets a new one? And the FISA court says, sure, yeah, that's a roving wiretap. And that's also an application that is probably really important and also secretly used for other applications. But again, those orders probably have 90 to 1 year expiration dates, and they're not all, the sky's not going to fall on Monday morning on those either. The thing that disappears at midnight, like Cinderella's glass slipper, is the phone dragnet, and the phone dragnet isn't all that important.
One thing I've always wondered about Cinderella's glass slipper, maybe you can fill me in on this, but if the carriage turned back into a pumpkin and the horses turned back,
the slipper?
How come the slipper, the prince was able to find the slipper and it remained a glass slipper? Have you ever been able to explain that to any of your children when you're telling the Cinderella story?
Well, here's the thing: is I bet that there are going to be some of these phone dragnet records that stick around, just like that slipper. And I bet that they're on some server, like on a tech person server, and therefore won't be destroyed along with all of the analytical records. And so it's probably something similar, that the glass slipper that the prince was able to find was on some kind of other server that meant that it didn't get destroyed with the other midnight disappearances.
Well, good, because that's good. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and use the phone dragnet analogy and the roving wiretap and the lone wolf when my 4-year-old asks me, how come the slipper never turned back into, whatever it is that Cinderella was wearing?
And if that doesn't confuse them more, then I don't know what will.
I'll just say your prayers. We're going to go to bed now, and it's not going to worry about the rest of the story.
Well, I can't explain it to you.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Marcy. It's a pleasure. This is the second time you've been on the show, so I hope to have you back again. So that's great. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Great conversation. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. This is have a great day. So this is George Yates' Justice for All, and that was Marcie Wheeler. She's now a frequent contributor to our show. It's the second time she's been on, and give us a little bit of help in this very confusing trying to figure out what in the world the Patriot Act is, roving wiretap, lone wolf, phone dragnet, all this crazy stuff. But anyway, the bottom line is you got a guy like Rand Paul, who's your libertarian presidential candidate, who is opposed to it. It says that it's a general warrant. That's what all these wiretaps. I think most of us are a little upset that, you mean the government can just listen in on my conversations because it happens to be, without my knowledge, being routed through Europe or something to that effect. So, and then there's no real concrete evidence that it has stopped terrorism, although our president thinks it works and some of our congressmen do. So it's still an open debate, and that's what democracy is all about. So glad you listened into that show with Marcie Wheeler, and you can read more about what she says on emptywheel.net and exposethefacts.org, Marcie Wheeler. We're going to have Joey Fletcher come back on for one last shot at we're going to be promoting this Bayside Harley Davidson events. He's with us here, the general manager of Bayside Harley. And before I get on with Joey, I got to remember also one of my sponsors of my show is the Village Butcher, family owned and operated, and the best ribs in Virginia Beach. So if you got to go to 1608 Hilltop West and talk to Brad or Ed, who are over there at Village Butcher. Joey, you like meat, don't you?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I know you love meat and you love to grill. And everybody out there that's listening to the show today knows if you eat meat, you really care about what you eat, right? And you should, and you're putting all that stuff in your system. And when we hear and read about all the kind of hormones and antibiotics and all the kind of stuff and the way we mistreat animals that we eat, but go to the Village Butcher because everything there is going to be grass-fed. And the meat is going to be antibiotic-free, hormone-free. And I'll tell you what, I was buying ribs there. I went over to Costco because they were cheaper. and I went back to the Village Butcher for my ribs. You can get those Kobe steaks. You can get the ribeyes. You can get the chuck. That's the best. So
I'm getting hungry now.
Yeah, so on your way home tonight, and of course they close at 6, so you need to dash by there and pick up your meat, and they're closed on Sundays too. So anyway, so that's my plug for my favorite meat shop. It's in, once again, it's the Village Butcher, family owned and operated. It's in 1608 Hilltop West. It's there in the Hilltop section of Virginia Beach, and it's the best place to buy your meat. And I'm going to head on there on the way home and pick up my ribs because I like to have my Saturday night rib grill. Anyway, we've got Joey Fletcher here. He's the general manager of Bayside Harley. What do you got for us, Joey?
Hey, George, thanks for having me on again. Just wanted to promote our pre-auction tent event coming up this Father's Day weekend, both Saturday and Sunday. Come down to Bayside Harley-Davidson. You'll have an opportunity to buy several Harley-Davidson at wholesale. Instead of me shipping them off to auction in Atlanta, we're now offering them to the general public. So it'll be a fun event, even if you don't buy a bike. We'll have live music, Thumbs Up Band by Jorge Yates, yours truly, as well as live music on Saturday. Thumbs Up playing Sunday. They haven't lined up my band for Saturday yet, so if anybody out there, you want to throw your name in the hat, give us a call down here at 397-5550. We'll put you on the stage out front of Bayside. Have some burgers, some beers, and a good time, and some motorcycles, so good combination.
I would love to have played on Saturday, too, but my son's graduating from Cox High School that day, and I got to go to his graduation around 3 o'clock. So
that's hard to believe, isn't it?
Can you believe he's graduating? A shout-out to all those parents of kids who they're finally graduating and you're kicking them out of the house. It's done. You're 18. On June 21st, you're on your own. See you later. Goodbye. But he's got prom tonight. I don't know if you May 30th today, and it's prom night all over the place. So
Cameron's got a date, so he's going. 10th grader going with a senior. So
I can't believe what cost. When I went to prom, I mean, what in the world they spend on prom now? They got the limo, the photos, they got to get the hotels, they got the prom dress, they got the. It's like costing $1,000 to do this prom thing.
The whole industry.
I tell you, it's crazy. So anyway, are you over at Bayside Harley right now?
Yeah, we're here Saturday and Sunday today from 9 to 6 and tomorrow from 10 to 4. So knocking them out, bikes flying everywhere. So it's a lot of fun just to come and hang out. The showroom's got over 100 motorcycles on it. Total inventory is well over 200, including our pre-owned selection. So it's looking out my office window right now. It's crawling with people.
Oh, it's business is good. So,
yep.
Well, we're here with Joey Fletcher. And what's the address over there at the Bayside Harley-Davidson?
We're real easy to get to. We're 2211 Frederick Boulevard in Portsmouth. Now, that's 1 mile on the Portsmouth side of the downtown tunnel. When you come out of the tunnel, it's just the second exit. Hop right off. Coming from the other direction, from 664, 58, or Suffolk, you want to get off of one exit before us at the Portsmouth Boulevard exit. Come down to Frederick Boulevard, hang a left. You can't miss us. We're the big orange Harley building on the right.
You know, we were my band was rehearsing last Tuesday night, and my guitar player Ron Hoban was talking about when he was playing at the Copacabana down in Miami. He said he had 7 motorcycles when he was living in Miami.
Wow!
Yeah.
At one time or over the course of his riding career?
I don't know if it was all. He had a Gold Wing. He had several Harleys. He had a Triumph, and I think there came a time where he said, it's time for me to move on to other things. So he doesn't ride bikes anymore. But
it's a lot of fun, and it's a lifestyle. So they say the statistics are that the average Harley owner will own 5 Harleys in his lifetime, not just motorcycles, but 5 Harleys. So once you get to the point where you feel like you want to live the Harley lifestyle, don't think that the first one's it, because the odds are against you. It's neat statistics.
So if you're riding along on one of those Harleys, can you listen to the radio and all that?
You would be surprised. You've got all the comforts of home plus navigation. They've got MP3 player input, satellite radio, navigation, two-way communication from the operator to the passenger, CB radio, cruise control.
What do you have? Do you have like speakers in your helmet, or how does that work?
There, you can get audio into your helmet, but they have very powerful, it's called boom audio speakers that, I tell you what, when we light those things off in the showroom, it fills up my entire showroom with sound. So
from one motorcycle.
One motorcycle. Yeah, it's fantastic audio quality.
So I should just get on one and like head to San Diego.
No problem.
Yes.
Got the touring line, the FLs, starting with the Road King, the Street Glide, the Road Glide, and Limiteds and Ultras. They'll get you where you want to go in comfort and style.
All right. So what's the most expensive Harley Davidson motorcycle that you carry? What's the number one, the best
The
one?
CVO Screamin' Eagle ships from the factory with every option, every piece of chrome that Harley makes, and a motor that you can't get any other way. It comes with a 110 cubic inch factory race-tuned motor. That's warranted as well, even though it produces so much power. You're pushing up close to $40,000, George.
Wow, $40,000.
I can't keep them in stock.
Oh, really? Everybody wants them.
It's the Screamin' Eagle. That's if you know anything about Harleys, when you say Screamin' Eagle, it says it all. It's factory custom.
Now, how many cc's is that?
Now, the Screamin' Eagle is 110 cubic inches, which is bumping up against 2 liters, so 19 and some change. And the standard motor is 103 cubic inches, which is well over 1,700 cc's, which is no slouch in its own.
So you put your big saddlebags on those things? I mean, when people go riding on the touring on them, they're all loaded. They put a windshield on them too, or
yeah,
what?
Full fairings, windshields, saddlebags, rear trunks. You name it. You pack them down like a mule and head on.
Screamin' Eagle. Have you got one in stock?
I've got one left.
Oh, really?
One left.
Well, you need to save it for me. I'm on my way back from the studio, so maybe I'll.
All right, come on by.
I'll take it for a test drive.
Well, we do test drives. We've got a handful of dealer tags. Come in, sign up, and go for a free ride.
What's the phone number over there in case somebody's driving down the road and wants to call you?
Yeah, it's an easy number. It's 757, of course, 397-5550.
397-5550. If you're out there riding down the road, call Joey Fletcher and have him hold that Screamin' Eagle for you, because I know that you want to get it for Dad for Father's Day. Anyway, so Joey, good seeing you, and maybe I'll drop by on the way home.
Come see me.
All right, man. Adios.
All right, have a great show.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, well, that was Joey Fletcher, general manager of Bayside Harley, and we're going to be playing out there. My band Thumbs Up will be playing out there on the 21st, which is Father's Day. And go on by there and pick yourself out one of those Screamin' Eagle Harleys. That's kind of fun to even think about, isn't it, to be riding one of those motorcycles. Wow. So thank you for joining us today. This is George Yates. It's been Justice for All for the last 2 hours. We'll be back next Saturday at 2 o'clock with another interesting guest. We had a couple of them today. So you have a great afternoon out there. Goodbye.